We are really excited to share a couple of keynote speakers that we have. So we're moving into the keynote speaker time of the conference, and we have Kari Michaels and Steph Sia are going to be sharing their experiences really relating to sex work as a labor issue. And this is a really important framing that many of you are familiar with, and their experience, I think, is going to really highlight what some of the challenges, what some of the issues, and what some of the opportunities are. So Kari Michaels is going to speak to us about sex workers strengthening the labor movement and the labor movement strengthening sex workers. Kari is, just one sec. Kari's the Executive Vice President of the BC General Employees Union. She joined the BCGEU when she and her fellow workers at Quantum Students Association united to stand up to their hostile employer. She's a passionate advocate for social justice and believes in building workers' capacity to take action to improve their working and living conditions. So I'll just ask you to join me in welcoming Kari. Thank you, Kari.
Hello. Can you hear me? We're good? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm just going to look for a spot for my coffee. I've balanced it precariously on the laptop. Apologies for any technical difficulties that might ensue. So I'm really excited to talk with you today about labor history, sex worker rights, and working class power. As an Executive Vice President of the BC General Employees Union, I'm honored to bring greetings to you today on behalf of our President, Steph Sia, our Provincial Executive, and the over 85,000 members who live in communities across BC and work in almost every sector of the economy. Our union is proud to join sex workers in the call to fully decriminalize sex work and allow sex workers to access full rights and protections as workers, to improve their working conditions and make their workplaces safer. We brought that call to our national union, the National Union of Public and General Employees, and it was adopted in June of 2022. And we also took it to the BC Federation of Labor in November of last year, and earlier this year to the Canadian Labour Congress. It would be nice if systemic change were as simple as passing a resolution, writing a sternly worded letter to the government, and then sitting back and calling it a day as those sweet, sweet rights flow in. And I don't need to tell any of you how agonizingly slow change takes, how disproportionately violent those who currently hold power are to those who are the most marginalized and vulnerable. And this makes fighting for change all the more risky. And yet, we see in every instance of advancing rights, be it human rights or worker rights, a long fight must be waged in order to see any victory. But before I talk about what that could or ought to look like for the labor movement and for sex workers, I want to give a bit of context and history for the conditions that we find ourselves in today. So for the vast majority of people here and on our planet, we hold one thing in common. We have to sell our ability to work. If we don't sell our ability to labor, we're guaranteed a life of misery, and for many, it will be a very short life. The current economic system that maintains this reality is called capitalism, and it's existed for only a few hundred years, just a short sliver of human history. And I won't spend too much time on the finer details, but I think it's important to preface any discussion we have about labor and worker rights by outlining the economic and social organization that dominates the lives of billions of people and therefore shapes the struggle for our rights. It is in this system that our current rights were fought for, maintained, and sadly too often eroded. At its root, capitalism relies on the exploitation of land, people, and animals in order to enrich the few who own these resources, the owning class or the capitalist class. People who are forced to work for the owning class for wages in order to live are called the working class. Some types of workers might be in gray areas, if you're an artisan or a freelancer, and maybe you don't have a boss or an employer that you're regularly employed by. However, for many of those who fall into these categories, we're still faced with a life of misery under capitalism if we do not produce, provide services, or otherwise earn an income. I first became involved in the labor movement when I organized my worksite to join the BCGEU. I didn't know much about unions, but I knew we needed to protect each other, and unionizing was one way for us to do that. And after joining the BCGEU, I quickly got involved as a shop steward, I joined our local executive, and I became active in the broader labor movement through the Young Worker Committee at the BC Federation of Labor, and then becoming a delegate to the New Weston District Labor Council. Shout out to them for sponsoring this conference. I learned very quickly in my time that what we had gone through in organizing our workplace was not something that was commonly felt by other workers in unions. In fact, very few of my fellow union members had been directly involved in unionizing their workplaces, and not many had participated directly in a workplace campaign or a strike. And so very little direct struggle seemed to take place in labor, and much of the focus was on onerous and overly legalistic interpretations of collective agreement language or legislation and arbitrator decisions. And all of this is like kind of interesting if you enjoy studying that kind of thing, but most of the time, for me and many of my fellow workers, it was incredibly frustrating, elitist, and exclusionary. In this time, I also started to learn more about working class history, about how unions were formed and the major fights that got us to where we are today. And in learning this history, I saw a different side of unions, one that wasn't buried in legal jargon, paperwork, but it was a living, breathing, and most importantly, we were fighting unions. And workers regularly shut down their workplaces and called on thousands of other workers to join them in their demands for shorter hours, higher pay, workplace safety protections, and other improvements to their conditions. And it was that collective action that saw some of the biggest changes and rights that we have today. To be in a union is to fight for your rights and to stand for your humanity. It was to see each other as human and to refuse to succumb to further degradation to the benefit of the owner or the boss. Now, I'm glossing over a lot, but one thing that bears highlighting that's not often talked about and is kind of really emerging in the mainstream labor movement is that not everyone was welcome in unions. Initially, unions were for craftspeople, specifically men who had learned a trade such as carpentry or masonry, following the guild model. And then unions became more inclusive of still just men, and particularly white cis men, who worked in industries like mining, logging, and fishing. In BC, it's important to recognize especially that many early unions and the labor movement was exclusionary to Asian men, Indigenous people, and women. And it took a lot of work to build inclusive unions that didn't help the boss to divide us as workers. Much more work is being currently done and needs to be done on that front within our own movement. And it's in this context of exclusion that we need to make sure that it's sex workers who lead in this fight, that the movement for sex worker rights is not subsidiary to or secondary to workers' rights, that it's the same fight despite the unique challenges sex workers face that we need to listen to and respond to. The labor movement has examples of unions built on solidarity of the working class and truly include the whole working class. One such union was founded in 1905, and it was called the Industrial Workers of the World. It is called the Industrial Workers of the World. It still exists. There's a branch here in Vancouver and in many places. At their founding, they didn't exclude any workers on any basis in the 1900s. It was established in direct response to trade unions at the time with their bureaucratic structures and division of workers amongst themselves. And the preamble to this union's constitution, which is still in place today with a few updates, begins with the working class and the employing class have nothing in common. There can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of the working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all the good things in life. So if it's through division that capitalists are able to weaken us and exploit us, it's through collective action and solidarity that we can build our own power to fight back. Working class power is only effective if we stand together. The IWW's preamble goes on to offer a vision of what's possible through solidarity and collective action. The army of production must be organized, it says. Not only for everyday struggle with capitalists, but also to carry on production when capitalism shall have been overthrown. Sex work is work. It existed before capitalism, and it will most likely continue to exist after in some form. That we may want to argue the conception of work, which will be totally different once we're freed from capitalist exploitation, and we don't need to get into that here. That's a conversation we can have, over lunch. But the point remains that if the labor movement is going to be relevant to workers, all workers, and pose a real threat to the oppression of those who hold wealth and power, then we will need the whole working class to be organized. We need sex workers to stand shoulder to shoulder with clerks, Uber drivers, firefighters, care aides, childcare workers, teachers, cleaners, airline attendants, grocery workers, the unemployed, and every single person who comprises those who suffer because our lives are not our own. We as workers need to stand with sex workers to demand that those who do sex work or any work should be afforded the exact same protections as right as any other worker. The decriminalization of sex work is an important part of getting that recognition. Over the last few decades, unions have been working on destigmatizing sex work and building a broader understanding that sex work is work. We have a long way to go. There have been missteps and setbacks, but that doesn't mean we give up. Despite the legal limitations, it's important to continue to organize. And there are examples of some sex workers successfully organizing into unions over the years, such as the Lusty Lady Dancers in the United States, who joined the Service Employees International Union, SEIU Local 790 in 1997, and turned it into a workers' cooperative in 2003 before it finally closed in 2013.
Because of red type.
I'll catch you on that later. I couldn't quite hear you. More recently, in 2022, dancers at Star Garden Strip Club in Los Angeles unionized with Actors Equity, and one of the striking dancers, Tess, told Teen Vogue writer Kim Kelly, "I'd like people to know that this is a fight for the working class. This is a fight for feminism. This is a fight against whorephobia. We are people just like you, and we are just trying to work." Another group of dancers at Magic Tavern in Portland, Oregon, also recently unionized in 2022 with Actors Equity. And there are other examples of sex workers organizing into unions around the world. However, their inclusion in unions is not without difficulty. Even the recent examples of workers organizing are met with stigmatization, not being taken seriously by fellow union members, and a serious problem if we're going to truly build solidarity. It's also a problem that right now, in terms of accessing mainstream unions, only those whose work is legal in some sense of the term are able to join a union.
And if you can afford dues.
Right. And then In Canada, there's the oldest sex worker organization, Maggie's Toronto, which recently unionized with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and in some nonprofit organizations that provide services for sex workers are also unionized. Efforts there have been fraught with stigmatization as well, and it's an ongoing process for us to continue to do the work of destigmatization. These experiences are similar to other groups of workers who are marginalized in some way, whether it's because of immigration status, race, language, gender, sexuality, or ability, just to name a few. And it's a symptom of how far we have yet to go in changing minds in society more broadly. Even within unions, there are groups of workers who look down on other groups of workers based on preconceived ideas about the value of certain types of work. For example, someone with a professional designation may look down on retail workers in the same union. And of course, there are prejudices about sex work and whorephobia, which are also present. And it's important to recognize that through organization, we can succeed in changing minds, hearts, and working conditions. Unfortunately, the structure of unions in many places, including Canada, have become part of the problem we need to tackle in order to build real collective power. So a little bit of history to explain the current situation. So there's a few significant events that led to the current labor relations framework in Canada. And in the early part of the 20th century, employers were moving away from violent tactics like murdering union organizers and sending militias to attack strikers as their main approach to controlling their workers. But at the same time, workers and unions were very active and militant, and there were several huge strikes and countless smaller ones in the 1930s. And bosses wanted to put an end to this militancy, and they were willing to give up a little bit of their power to get it. Responding to employers' need for labor peace, and in some cases, seeing a political opportunity in supporting mild protections, the state started to take on a more active role of mediating between workers and employers. The Trade Union Act was introduced by Prime Minister John A. Macdonald in 1872, and this was a result of the Toronto Typographical Workers' Strike for a 9-hour workday. This act basically made it so that workers who were forming a union were no longer able to be arrested for criminal conspiracy. Some say that legalized unions, but to be honest, it wasn't illegal to be part of unions in Canada prior to this. You were just charged for conspiracy to, disrupt the economy. It's weird what they consider a crime and not a crime. Macdonald later passed another act making picketing illegal, and over the years, laws could be easily changed and governments could take these rights away and declare strikes and union meetings criminal activities as they saw fit. By early 1944, there was the ruling Liberal government passed an emergency order in council, Privy Council 1003, which required employers to recognize unions chosen by the majority of workers in the workplace, and they established the Labor Relations Board. After the Second World War, this was adopted by most provinces, and legal processes for union certification, recognition, and bargaining were created, making a clear distinction between legitimate and illegitimate unions, which is an important distinction to make as we talk about organizing sex workers. And so, when we see that the state at various levels have given rights to workers, they've also restricted the ability for workers to exercise their collective power. And this trade-off has been incredibly damaging when we look at the decline of the labor movement as fewer and fewer fights are waged by workers for workers. Sex workers' demands for recognition of their labor as legitimate will require unions across Canada to challenge the current power structure that we have become perhaps a little too comfortable in. Questioning the legal structures that confine sex workers means questioning the legal structures that confine workers broadly. Workers face daily violations of their rights, even with laws and collective agreements in place, not to mention that these rights are not guaranteed. There are many ways that sex workers are already organizing within sex worker-led organizations. One such example is Sex Work Industrial Movement, which is based out of Montreal. And some sex workers, as I mentioned earlier, are able to join more mainstream unions, but there's also the IWW, which organizes the worker, and so that union follows you wherever you go, and they also offer organizer training for workers. I happen to be one of the trainers for both their organizer trainings here locally. We also do online trainings. There's also the opportunity to form an independent union for workers. Again, in the legal context of Canada, that has to be for specific types of work that can be certified as a collective bargaining agent. But independent unions can also affiliate to larger unions for support. So BCGEU, for example, has the BC Ferry Marine Workers Union as one of our affiliate unions. There's also a process the BCGEU has in our constitution called special associate membership. And this is a way for workers who are wanting to organize in non-traditional industries, but are difficult to organize for various reasons, and a way for them to participate in the broader labor movement. And my point by just naming a few of the ways that organization can happen is that it will take a multitude of approaches. We need to connect and learn from each other, organizing in places across Canada and across the world. And for those of us who are already in unions, those who are providing services and support for sex workers, those who are committed to struggling with sex workers, we need to be willing to take risks to act in solidarity. So in the labor movement, we talk a lot about solidarity, but we don't always stop to think about what it really means. So I'd like to share a bell hooks quote on solidarity, as I think it perfectly captures the meaning of the word, and I'll close on this. So she wrote in reference to feminist organizing, but it's the same for worker organizing. Solidarity is not the same as support. To experience solidarity, we must have a community of interests, shared beliefs and goals around which to unite, to build sisterhood. Support can be occasional, it can be given, and just as easily withdrawn, and solidarity requires sustained, ongoing commitment. Our shared interests as workers is what unites us to fight against our exploitation. Collectively, we have the strength to build a better world. Thank you for your time today.
So Kari will come back in a few minutes, and we're going to have a round of questions and answers. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask Steph Sia to come on up. And so Steph is the host and producer of the By SIA Podcast. She's also a Living and Community Board Member. She's a sex worker with over 10 years of experience in the business and uses her platform to educate and destigmatize the sex work industry. So please, a warm welcome for Steph. So I'm just going to set up your PowerPoint, but I'll pass you the mic while you're waiting.
In the meantime, why don't we give a quick applause to Kari Michaels? That was incredible. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me, Living in the Community, for all of your hard work that has gone to putting this conference on over the past year, not to mention over the past week, which was really hectic. But also wanted to acknowledge that, perfect, thank you so much. Thank you. Also want to acknowledge that we are on the stolen, unceded, and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Today, we're going to be talking about sex work as a labor issue, and kind of in conjunction with Kari's talk. It's a little bit different. Maybe it's going to be a bit of a reminder of why you're here today, but also to talk about why sex work works for so many folks, including myself, including for so many people in the room today, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit about that. For myself, if you don't know who I am, and I don't know a lot of you here, but hello, my name is Steph Sia. I am, hello. I am the host and producer of the By SIA Podcast, which is a podcast I started 4 years ago to destigmatize the work. A lot of you are guests that I've had on the show here. Hello, good to meet you in person. And the show, yeah, it's about the show is about destigmatizing sex work, because oftentimes our work is highly misunderstood. There's a lot of assumptions that are made, lots of stereotypes that are made as well. So I bring different guests onto the show every single week to tell it like it is, and also provide a really transparent approach to the industry. I kind of want to get started with the presentation, and you're probably asking me, what does a podcaster know about sex work? We did mention that I do have over 10 years of experience in the industry. I started off as a sugar baby. I'm also a cam model. I'm also a spicy dancer amongst various stages here in the Lower Mainland, and a content creator. So I mentioned my start in the industry was as a wee little sugar baby. And I don't know if it's working here. And that was one of my profile pictures on Seeking Arrangement back in the day, 10 years ago. And basically 10 years ago, if I was going to rewind my life a bit, I had just graduated from SFU, so broke college student. I had just got out of a relationship at the time. I was still kind of working hourly wage jobs, and I was like, I need more money. As a lot of us, like get sex work because money. And my roommate at the time was like, oh, well, maybe you should try sugaring. I was like, okay, sugaring, and I'm referring to sugaring as sugar baby, not sugaring like the waxing hair removal thing. But yeah, she mentioned that to me, and she's like, oh, well, you like dating older men, and you could get paid for it. And that is the kind of mindset that I was in. I was going to provide companionship for older men and get paid for it. And I did not know what I was getting myself into. I was very naive, I was very green getting into the industry, and I have learned a lot since then, which will be discussed over the next 20 minutes. Well, that's me. But yeah, I always like to begin these talks about, why sex work? Why do people choose and willingly choose this type of work? And maybe I'll just throw it out to the audience. We want to just yell enthusiastically what some reasons why people get into sex work are.
We like it.
Yeah. These are all great options here. I've heard money, I've heard we like it, visibility, disability, yes, absolutely. These are all valid reasons why we get into sex work. There are a multitude of reasons why we get into sex work, and if you did not know, there are some cheat sheets on the sheet inside of your folder as well. But the obvious one is money, especially if you're living here in so-called Vancouver. It is especially expensive. Money is a great motivator. We need to be able to earn a living somehow. We need to be able to make money somehow, and sex work provides that. I mean, how many jobs out there can you name that can pay a higher than minimum wage, have flexibility, is accessible to many, low barrier to entry, no licensing, education? Anyone? What was that?
I said drug dealer.
Or that too. Legally speaking. But yeah, but as you mentioned, like there's not much. There's not much here. So that's why sex work is a really great option here. It provides money. Accessibility as well. As I mentioned, doesn't require any education, doesn't require any kind of accreditation, licensing, any kind of special training, stuff like that. Also, for those who are neurodivergent or might have some kind of disability as well, sex work provides a really, I don't want to say easy, obviously it's not easy, but it is definitely a viable option for many. Flexibility is also another option as well, another reason why folks get into this type of work. For myself, 9 to 5, I did corporate life for a long time. I found it did not work for me. I usually start tuning out around the 5 to 6 hour mark, and also didn't really quite pay as much to support my lifestyle. Also living in Vancouver, as mentioned, is expensive. So these are just a range of reasons. Of course, there's many more. I can't go over them all today. We can spend the whole day listing them out here, but yeah, money, accessibility, flexibility are major reasons, and we've been doing it forever. It is the oldest profession in the book, as Kari mentioned in her presentation as well. We've been doing it forever. We've been here for a long time. But as you know, there are a lot of complexities with the work as well. And again, throwing out to the audience, can you name a few challenges that sex workers go through? A couple things that are perhaps barriers to sex workers or industry, and shout outs. Blah, 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 blah. That's all I heard. But yes, we'll definitely go over throughout the list here as well. But I mean, when I got into sex work 10 years ago, baby sex worker, again, I did not know it was sex work. For myself, it was something I was like, okay, I can live this lifestyle and, you know, go to fancy dinners and get paid and stuff, but not acknowledging that it was work. And there was a lot of things wrong with that. Not treating it as work. 2, not knowing the risks that can come with this job, the amount of emotional labor that comes along with this job. For me, it's just like, oh, it's just like a fun thing to do and something that, you know, I kind of enjoyed at the time. But I also had like a lot of internalized whorephobia at the time. I didn't want to be associated or have the label as a sex worker. I was really defensive when people called me an escort. I was really, really not comfortable with that. Of course, a lot has changed since then. I've grown a lot in those 10 years, but yeah, there's a lot of nuances that come along with the work and with this industry. We'll kind of go over a few of those notes here. So, stigma, I think, is the biggest thing. This work, this industry is highly stigmatized. It is judged very highly. There are a lot of repercussions that come along with this job, people not really understanding what this job is, not understanding that it is work, not understanding the struggles that we go through every day. I was just speaking with someone earlier today, and the psychologist in the room, Larry, I think his name was saying like he wrote a book about sex as religion, and he's already getting backlash on that. And that's just a book title. Like, sex workers, we face a lot of backlash here, and it is solely because this work is stigmatized. Again, I mentioned that it's not recognized as real work, it's not legitimized. We also have the amount of risk that comes with the job as well, not just talking about physical safety, but also mental, emotional safety as well, but also the risk to like potential exposure to STIs, the risk of being doxxed to your family, your friends. If you have a family, your children might be getting taken away from you. There's a lot of things that can come with this role. As mentioned, it's a very vulnerable job. It's a very personal job, very intimate. It's sex, you know? So there is a lot that comes with that. It's a lot of human connection. It's a lot of your time that you're never gonna get back with people. It's again, very, very intimate. I like that ringtone. Of course, to protect yourselves, the work has to be, for most of us, anonymous. So a lot of us will have to take different aliases, different names on, maybe wear a different kind of outfit or change your hair in a certain type of way, just to protect ourselves and also our identities. Because there are a lot of other factors, as I mentioned, you know, people might have family, etc. People might still be working a corporate job that you can't really involve yourself in sex work with. There's lots of repercussions with that. So some things we have to keep that in mind. And because this work is done and conducted anonymously, it can also be quite isolating as well. Again, when I first started, I didn't know anyone else that was a sugar baby or doing this type of work before, so I didn't really know who to talk to. If I had a bad date, I didn't have anyone to chat with because I was also ashamed to be like, hey, I'm doing this kind of work, I'm having sex for money. And that to me was really, really hard because I I really lean on support systems, and not having a support system is incredibly difficult and isolating. And then of course, the criminal nature of this job, which we'll get into over the next slides. In a lot of parts of the world, sex work is still criminalized. And it's no stranger here in Canada what those legalities are, which we'll get into shortly. So, the gaps and the pitfalls of sex work. There's a lot of them. And I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with this as well. But here in Canada, we are under the Nordic model or the Swedish model, found in a lot of Scandinavian countries. So that, in a nutshell, here basically condemns the buyer, and they claim to protect the seller or the worker. But what it does here is actually pushes the work more underground, exposing sex workers to more risk, increased danger, and basically unable to do their job in a safe way. I'm sure there's a lot of you here that work in outreach that witness this every day with people that you work with. And again, along with that, Bill C-36, enacted in 2014, it's the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Acts. This is a set of laws here, again, basically, I'm glossing over a lot of things here because of time, but again, aiming to eradicate sex work. It's another end demand model, which I feel most of us in the room know that this does not work. So it's really disappointing, especially hearing we did have that constitutional challenge and how that was not recognized earlier this year. Very disappointing news. But again, lots of pitfalls here. Again, overrepresentation. So talking about lots of marginalized groups, racialized folks, people from the LGBTQIA communities usually are at a higher risk or increase of discrimination, racism, fetishization, assault, and violence. And of course, lack of labor rights, like kind of tagging on to what Kari was saying in her presentation here. We don't have many labor rights. We are seen as independent contractors rather than employees. So what that means is that, stuff that you would get in your standard 9-to-5 job, like benefits, your RMT, you get paid time off, you get vacation pay. Yeah, stuff like that, you get that. That is awarded to employees, but not for independent contractors, not for sex workers. That stuff, unfortunately, we would have to pay out of pocket in order to kind of reap some of those benefits. So again, unfair, unjust, lacking protection and support. Again, there's so many great organizations in this room, which is awesome. Thank God for you guys. But there's a lot of areas where sex workers cannot seek out support, or it's severely limited. For example, a lot of our businesses run on cash, or some of us, it's unsafe to open up a bank account. We can't even have something as simple as that. A lot of us are censored online. There's a lot of that kind of stuff, which isn't great. Disproportionately affects sex workers a lot more. And of course, pushback from SWERFs, various religious groups as well. So it's a lot of morality issues that come with groups such as this that don't believe sex work is a consensual thing. People in these groups think that, well, how can someone choose this line of work? But as mentioned before, earlier in the slides, I've definitely mentioned there's so many great reasons why we choose this line of work and why it is a viable form of employment. So moving away from negativity and the obvious things, a question I get a lot on my podcast, or even in the dance or change room, they're I have to update my resume, but I've been working in a strip club for so long. What kind of skills can I actually bring to the table? What can I actually do to transition to get out of this work if they choose to get out of this work? And I'm there's so many skills that you can do, and that are transferable from, say, the strip club or whatever kind of work that you do. And I'll kind of outline this. As a person that has worked in corporate for a number of years, and I'm also a marketing and communications consultant outside of sex work, and have hired people, I can definitely tell you sex workers have some mad skill. Yes. So obviously one of them would be sales skills. We definitely know how to sell. I'm not the best hustler at the club. If you've ever worked with me, you'll know that I am lazy, but I just don't like it. But sales skills, there's a number of skills that I've learned from sex work that have made me a better negotiator, that have really helped me upsell, that really helped me, add on more sales to whatever it is that I'm doing. Those are really great skills that I've acquired over the last 10 years working in this industry, not just at the club, but also online, negotiating rates and whatnot. This is a really great skill that I think any sex worker would definitely have. Administrative, definitely. I mean, who here, I don't have to, I'm not calling anyone out, but I have an OnlyFans. There's a lot of administrative back-end work that comes along with any kind of online work, a lot of back-end. It's a lot of copy, a lot of content writing, a lot of videography skills, editing, all of the boring things that you don't see in the front. It all goes on behind closed doors, and again, super great skills that you can kind of transfer over to the workforce. This includes like organizational skills, project management skills, coordination, etc. Of course, I mentioned that this work can be isolating, yes, but on the flip side, we're gonna do this over quicker. So yeah, I would say that working independently is definitely another skill that you can get from this work, because we're so used to working by ourselves. Marketing, as I mentioned, making compelling content here, making sure that it's appealing and persuasive so people would want to buy it. Of course, collaboration. I know that collaboration is a big theme for today, but the ability to work as a team, ability to multitask, and of course, this all boils down to entrepreneurialism. So a couple things before we close out, what we can learn from sex workers. For myself, things that I've learned over the past 10 years, the importance of human connection. We're in a customer service-based type role. We need to maintain these relationships. We need to nourish those relationships. It's super important. The art of the hustle as well. Learning how to be a really great salesperson is something you can definitely learn from this industry, don't learn in this line of work. And also resilience. I would say that sex workers are some of the most resilient groups of people that I've met before. The drive, the hustle, the grit that we go through is incredibly impressive. And yeah, what you can help to support. Don't gatekeep, be a resource. So many organizations here in the room are great resources. Connect with them. Collaboration over competition. I think we'll definitely be able to do a lot of collaboration over the next 48 hours. And of course, educate. I think it's really important to, when you're reacting to things, it can be really easy to have a reactionary response, but I come at things with a really educational type of approach, which I think would help people take you more seriously. And I would like to close out saying that, over the last 10 years, and fast forward to where I am now, I would have never thought I would be on stage in this room full of amazing intellectual people fighting for the same fight, which is it's just impressive. I do want to say, to close out, kind of like some takeaways from the end of this presentation, that we are professionals. This is a legitimized form of work, and we need to take it seriously. We contribute to the economy. We provide an essential service to humans. We're also seen as a valuable asset to the workforce for all of the points that I laid out before. We are a resilient force. And lastly, we are human. We are sex workers, and sex work is work. Thank you very much.
All right, so we have a few minutes for some questions. We've got about 10 minutes, and we've got Shona's going to be our mic runner. So this is an opportunity to ask any questions of Kari or Steph, really with this focus on sex work as a labor issue. And I wonder, maybe if someone could get rid of that projector. It's just in our eyes. And maybe if you just close the shutter, that would be. Yeah, maybe if you just close it. Somehow they'll work on that. We'll survive it. So I think what really was highlighted in both, but kind of looking at it from different perspectives, is the importance of viewing sex work as work, and which allows for a different kind of collective organizing, and I think a different perspectives. But one theme that I really heard was that the ways that stigma needs to be overcome. And so that's both within unions, but it's collectively, and you also spoke to internally, right? So I think that was a really important piece to bring forward. And I was interested also in Kari, your piece in really talking about how unions, like they were set up in a particular way, but there's been an evolution of kind of what gets considered as appropriate for unions. So I would love to open it up to questions that are in the audience. Maybe just like raise your hand up and Shona will wiggle her way. Okay, there's a purple hand and an orange hand at the back. Making our way bit by bit. Lunch is coming soon. It's an early lunch. Let's go. I think we're going to the orange person first. Okay, I love it.
And I just wanted to address my question to Kari. I actually was on the General Executive Board of the Industrial Workers of the World. I'm sure you know about what I'm about to speak about, but for the purposes of the room knowing. So, I'm going to follow up with a question, sort of like a preamble and then a question. So, I was among the first all-women General Executive Board. It was non-men, there was one non-binary person. And we were systematically removed from office via false erroneous charges and grievances and forced to not be allowed to take office again. So I am very much, first of all, I loved everything you said about the labor movement history. I'm right there with you. That's why I participated in these labor movements. My question for you is, when people like myself have actually, participated and we've experienced this kind of systemic, even within the labor movement, direct action labor movements, I guess I could probably answer the question myself, but for the point of parsing it out for the people in the room, how do you feel that we can continue to stay in solidarity with each other while using these networks and these frameworks of labor unionism, direct action, mutual aid networks, in order to further our cause? Because I'm a sex worker. I was told that I sexually harassed someone by writing an article, and the only reason they said I sexually harassed someone was because I included my website to show that I had authority to speak on the issue. Because of course the name I use as a fellow worker in the union was my legal name, and of course the name that I'm using right now is the name that I use when doing public work. So there was kind of that schism, and they outed me and they put both names, and it actually caused me crossing the US border an issue. So just so people know, not all unions are safe, of course, but that's a demonstrable example. But Kari, or Steph, hi Steph, lovely to meet you. Love your podcast, and I'm curious what your thoughts, what your wisdom, what would you say to keep all of us sort of on the prize, eyes on the prize? What would you say?
Yeah, no, and those are particularly some of the examples I was thinking of, especially talking about missteps and issues of, honestly, stigma and hostility. And part of it is, it's unique to sex workers, but it's also unique to people who are trying to make space in any movement. And in no way do I want to speak to the details or the context because I don't know them, and I don't want to make excuses for it because there is no excuse. But I think what's important to take away from any example like that is, one, our movements are made up of people, and people are fundamentally flawed. And people are going to create harm and divide, and we need to continue to work, both people who are within the groups that are trying to make space and people who are in solidarity with those groups, and to be willing to step into those situations and say this is not okay. Sometimes it means creating your own space and inviting others into that space with context and rules. And just a very brief example of this kind of push and pull within labor. Just yesterday was the anniversary of the establishment of the Service Office and Retail Workers Union of Canada, which no longer exists. It was created by feminists in the 70s to organize predominantly women, Indigenous and marginalized workers, and they were essentially a fighting union going and organizing workers trade unions wouldn't touch because they were too difficult. They eventually had to disband their union because they were not only attacked by industry, but they were attacked by other trade unions in the mainstream labor movement. And this is an ongoing trend in the history of workers' movements that we are all trying to fight and to build a truly united working class. And I don't have a perfect answer or solution, but I know that we need to continue to keep entering these spaces and challenging these things when they come up.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's one more question. I think what I heard you speaking to is like unions aren't free of all of the human flaws, right? Or bias and stigma. They're present inside the union and outside. And I think this is a really interesting example, or you being here is that actually how do you do it from the inside as well as from the outside? How are you organizing, in these both of these ways? So we had another question before lunch. Yes, please.
I'm an independent sex worker of over 10 years, and I've always thought of unions as like things people do when they're employed, and being an independent contractor, you don't have that. So I just wondered if you had any insights on how independent contractors like us could potentially form a union, and what that is. That even a thing? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, and maybe if I can add, just how do unions account for the diversity of the ways that sex work takes place? That might be just an added piece.
So there is a current struggle within unions to organize or to advocate for independent contractors. A good example is UFCW and Uber drivers is trying to get them established as employees. So there's different ways they legalistically try to redraw those lines and to make arguments for access to certain rights. And I think there's opportunity for conversations around the different types of work that are included in the umbrella of sex work, but also importantly, and I think it speaks to the legal situation in Canada of what unions are and who they can serve, is finding the ways that may be adjacent to trade unions to begin that organizational work. And there's a number of organizations here who may be doing that or talking about that, but part of coming here and what we can talk about is how labor unions can make those spaces within themselves to build those connections. And for independent contractors in particular, I know there's advocacy around freelance work and that kind of thing, so it would just be necessary to have those conversations and to look outside the current legal context. It's most of what I can offer. I don't know if you want to speak to independent.
Let's think quickly, yeah. I'm not sure exactly what type of independent contracting you do. We don't have to name it here, but I do know that there is an adult performers guild. I think that is based in the States though, but I know that there is some organizing that is available in the States for that, but maybe we can touch base later on. I don't want to give you the wrong information here.
Thank you.
Let's see, one more question perhaps? Right there.
I just want to know what your advice is for sex workers and organizations navigating these spaces that are not designed for us. I want to know how we enter in and navigate them safely.
Great question. Maybe we can have both of you answer that question.
Can you elaborate a little bit more as well? I just want to get more context.
I feel like within the context of sex work, a lot of our work is interpreted as negative, morally wrong, and even entering into leftist spaces such as unions, we're often met with scrutiny. And I would just like to know, how you feel we can navigate that with the least amount of harm to workers.
Yeah, okay, this is a great question, for sure. I would say it can be really scary and overwhelming to go at it yourself. So what my advice would be is to, again, like peers and like so many other organizations here, is if you can maybe go through with an organization and see if that is a way, and if there's other people that also share the same feelings as you, to go at it collaboratively rather than independently, because again, it can be very scary, very overwhelming. Do not know where to go from there. Another thing too, I believe in education and really trying to educate folks as much as possible. So really trying to know that, okay, you are the expert in this, really kind of, own that and really utilize that as a tool. I think that would be my advice for you.
Yeah, and my advice comes from my own experience navigating sometimes hostile situations where you feel like you're the only voice in the room kind of speaking on something, and sometimes it helps to think of this in that context. But I think of the people who I am able to reach out to one, debrief situations, but also to prep for going into a situation where I'm not sure what's going to happen, if I can have someone there with me, or if I know people in the room who I can look to speak up or to raise issues if I'm not being heard. Those are some techniques, and I know there's other folks who do work. I love the transformative justice movement and their talk around pods and building systems and networks of accountability, which can help just in the heavy work that we sometimes need to engage in to have people see us as human, fundamentally. And the other piece I would just say is when we can connect with each other and invite people to show up, it can be really disarming for people who may have that kind of immediate reaction. And so I think finding ways to work with each other and committing to sharing spaces so that we're able to continue to destigmatize, demystify, and really it's in that shared context that we can actually do that. It's different when it's abstract, when it's outside of what you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. What I heard in much of what both of you said was the importance of doing it in a collective way. So whether it's a union, it doesn't have to just be, you don't have to wait for a union to actually work collectively. So there's something really important about the peer support and about organizations that are supporting and these kinds of gatherings that actually allow those relationships to build. So I want to thank you both. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much.